But the content for today's live stream is coming based on Jonathan Cahn's research into what he calls the return of the gods. So this is going to be a bumpy ride. A little bit of a bumpy ride. Anyway, I'm just waiting for folks to join. How's everybody doing today? Hopefully everyone is doing well. And if you haven't seen Jonathan Cahn's recent interview on this, I think it was, I can't remember the guy that he did it with, but anyhow, it is on YouTube, and you can shoot me a DM, I'll send you the link for it. It is an incredible interview, and makes so much sense with what we're seeing with the craziness of culture today, and the way that people have kind of lost their minds. They're doing things that, 5 years ago, people would have looked at and said, this is crazy. Like, for example, bringing kids to drag shows and stuff like that. You would ask people about this like 5-10 years ago, and people would be like, oh, heck no, I'm not doing that with my kids. And now it's being applauded. You are being looked down upon as narrow-minded and bigoted if you don't agree that parents can do such things, that children can be exposed to such things. Anyways, so that's kind of the topic that I want to discuss. Discussing kind of the background of these spiritual entities that are behind this movement in our society. So the premise here is based around the book Return of the Gods that Jonathan Cahn had released last year, I think in June is what he said, sometime in the summer last year. I have not read it, I'll disclose that, but the stuff that I've heard him interview on has all been accurate from what I've seen with regards to scripture. So he makes the argument that these deities that are spoken of throughout pagan culture, Greek pagan, Roman pagan culture, Sumerian culture, all of that, these deities, these demonic spiritual entities, never ceased to exist, okay? He argues that they have been coming back under different names. And the reason why is because, again, the gods, the language behind the names of the gods, like Asherah or Molech or Baal, all of these names are just masks that these demonic spirits and principalities put on for the culture of that time, and then they remove the mask and they pick up another mask and they put that on, whatever fits the particular time that you're looking at, right? So they have no particular theological name, they're coming back under different names. And so Cahn makes this statement that the de-Christianization of our society in the 20th century has brought back all of these old demons, and for that matter, many more. So his book centers on the belief that three particular ancient Near East gods, Baal, Ishtar, and Molech, have now been enthroned in some sense over the post-Christian West. And he does call it post-Christian. And that West, particularly the United States, although being from Canada as well, when I look at things that are going down here, our society is going to face the same fate that ancient Israel faced when it went after those gods. And it's a more compelling case than you might expect. So to understand the mystery, you have to put it together. Gods were all over the ancient world, right? It was a pantheistic viewpoint. There was no such thing as monotheism. There was no such thing as a belief in one God. The concept of Israel believing that there is only one God was very novel for their time. And the Bible says that behind the gods in the Hebrew scriptures says it was something called the Shadim. The Shadim are the spirits. In the New Testament, Paul says behind the gods are these beings that he called in the Greek the daemoni. And that's where we get the word, right? So these are spirits. They're not just figments of people's imagination. And the thing is that back then, if all of these cultures were given to the gods, it meant they were given to those spirits. It meant that those cultures were possessed by those principalities. And it means that Western civilization has been possessed by that. But back in Yeshua's time, Messiah happens, right? He comes into the world. He has the power, of course, over those spirits. So when he goes and he commands his disciples to get the gospel out into the Roman Empire, into the far, far reaches of the corners of the earth, right? Western civilization, it starts ending the rule and the reign of these gods. These gods flee from their temples. The temples become emptied out, right? The spirits were cast out. This is one of the greatest exorcisms in world history, what the gospel did to all of these nations and to those pagan cultures. And that's why our civilization is so unique. It is being part of this exorcised civilization. But here's the warning. Remember when Yeshua spoke about the man who had the demons come out of him? And it says they go into the wilderness, and then that demon says, I'm going to go back and return to my house. So he comes back and he finds the house swept and clean, and he goes, you know what? I'm going to go back and I'm going to bring my friends. And he comes back with 7 others, right? So now that house, that person is more possessed than they were at the beginning. They're worse off. They have been repossessed. Okay, they were cleaned out. Now they're repossessed. And people believe that Yeshua is talking about a man. He uses the concept of a man and the allegory of a man, but he says, so it will be with this generation. Okay? So he's talking about something much more massive. And if you take that principle, as Jonathan Cahn did, and you apply it in the biggest way, here's the warning. Our culture, especially, and I'm talking Western culture, okay? Our culture has been exorcised, so to speak. God came in, they went out, right? Here's the warning. If the house or if your culture, if your nation ever turns away from God, then the doors are going to open up for those spirits to return and repossess the culture. So the door gets opened up for those gods, those ancient gods who are behind the spirits or the spirits behind them, to come back, repossess the culture. And that is exactly what is happening. And that's the craziness that began happening in the last 50, 60 years in America. It's because those ancient gods have come back, right? So for example, take Baal, for instance, all right? If you've read the Bible, you've heard about Baal, especially in the Old Testament. In the ancient world, Baal was a god of fertility and abundance, right? His cult was a cult of carnality. So in one sense, this is what the West has turned to. It's this worship of carnality, of the things that just bring instant gratification and pleasure. The worship of sex, of money, turning people away from the way of righteousness that is discussed in Scripture into whatever you so choose to do that. You do you. It's that kind of concept, right? And so as America was beginning to turn away from God, when they started removing prayer, for example, this is what happened with Israel. They began removing prayer. The United States, Canada began removing prayer in the early 60s. The word stopped being in our schools. It always starts with the kids, right? It always starts with the children, because that is where the power of the next generation lies, right? Is with the children. So these are all of the things that cast the gods out. The word, prayer, right? Fasting, supplication of the Lord. These are the things that drove out the demons. Remember, the disciples went up to Yeshua and they were like, well, how come you can cast this spirit out and we can't? This kind only comes out by fasting and prayer. And so yet those biblical disciplines were removed. Like, they were being stopped from being taught in the schools, right? So you've removed those things that actively combated possession, and then you've opened the door for repossession. So the house isn't going to stay empty, right? Something else is going to come in. If you take these things out of the schools, something else is going to come into the schools. Something else is going to come into the children. And that's what we've been witnessing. And now the first god, or this first principality that always begins this downfall kind of domino effect, is the possessor. It is Baal. His name means the possessor or the Lord, right? And one of his symbols is the bull. So there has been a bull statue, And those of you who've been following me for a long time, I posted about this when it first happened. The bull statue was erected near Wall Street to honor the bull market, right? It was an idol of wealth. So Baal is the possessor. His job, what he did with ancient Israel, was he called on them to forget their God, the one true God, right? Yahweh. He calls them to start driving God out. So that spirit has been in the West and has been driving God out. The Bible says that he called them to turn away from the commandments, right? So we have watched this casting down of the 10 Commandments. In fact, there are so many people today who, back in the day, people used to respect the Sabbath. They used to take a day off. Even if it wasn't Shabbat, they still took a day out of the week. Businesses would close down, everyone would take a day of rest, right? Everybody respected the Sabbath. This was back in like the 30s. And now, nobody respects the 10 Commandments. You ask people about the Sabbath day, and people are just like, I don't have to do that. It's in the 10 Commandments. You do all of the others. You say that you have to respect them, and yet they don't, right? So they have cast down the moral code, so to speak, the foundation of God's legal system. And so we've been watching the repaganization of the West. And Baal's job, or his mission, the mission of this principality, is to take a quote-unquote Christian nation or Judeo-Christian nation and turn it into a pagan nation. And that's essentially what has been happening. He's the first spirit that comes, right? And it says this spirit comes and it says, let me get my friends, right? So from there, we have more that happens. So Baal comes in first. The second god that is connected in with this whole group of ancient Near East pagan gods is Ishtar, also known as Astarte, Ashtoreth, Venus, Inanna, Aphrodite. Okay, some of you might be recognizing some of these names. She is the Babylonian goddess of love, and she was the goddess of holy or sacred prostitution, of transgression, of the blurring of boundaries, essentially. She was also the goddess of gender fluidity. And I thought that might be a little bit too on the nose to be true, but if you look at authoritative resources online, it's fact. Here's a short bit from Psychology Today. They say the Mesopotamian Ishtar, the beautiful goddess of fertility, love, war, and sex, was sometimes represented with a beard to emphasize her more bellicose side. She could change a man into a woman, and the Asinu, Kugaru, and Kuku, who performed her cult, had both male and female features. Really interesting. So, in the Bible, she is referred to as Ashtoreth. In Mesopotamia, she was called Ishtar. And when she went into the Greek land, she was called Aphrodite, and then Venus. She's all over. Is still very highly thought of by pagan culture today. And she was mentioned specifically there. So in Canaanite mythology, Ashtoreth is considered to be the wife of Baal. So Baal had a wife, okay. And so when Baal comes, the next one to come, it says in the Bible, it says Baal, and then it says Ashtoreth. And so she comes in. So what this means is once the door is open, this goddess of sexuality and sexual immorality enters a culture. Her temples were very well known. I mean, Paul even warned against looking like the temple prostitutes back in the time, but her temples were very well known for being places of just debauchery, essentially. And it was very public. So if she returns, what happens if she comes means that that culture and that nation undergoes sexual revolution. That is a sign of the possession of Ishtar, or of this goddess. In her Greek form, the myth goes that she gave birth to a child named Eros, and that's where you get the word erotica from. So erotica starts flooding your culture when Ishtar comes in. The word, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to get explicit here or anything, but I'm just trying to explain it to you guys so you understand what's going on. The word for prostitute, which is what she was in her Greek incarnation, is the word porne, right? So that's where you get the word porn from. So there becomes, at the time that you get this repossession of this deity within a culture, you've got this explosion of erotica, you've got this explosion of pornography all over the culture. So what Baal does, in one sense, she's repaganized, she's now overturned biblical standards of sexuality and marriage. She is paganizing the culture through sexuality and through possessing it. And here's the thing too, what also happened at the time that the sexual revolution was occurring in the West, in like the 60s, right, 60s, 70s, was the rise of the New Age and the occult, okay? So Ishtar is also a goddess of spells and of witchcraft, and so she has cast a spell on our culture. So, so Jonathan Cahn was asked, what would it mean for America to fall into the worship of Ishtar? And he answers, he says this: we would expect a transformation to begin that would alter the realm of sexuality. With the goddess's entrance, we would expect biblical standards and ethics surrounding sexuality and marriage to begin to erode, and we would expect the moral foundations and values that had undergirded Western civilization for nearly 2,000 years to begin being overturned. In short, we would expect there to be a revolution in the realm of sexuality, a sexual revolution. That's literally what we have already seen. It happened, you know, over 40 years ago now. Now, not only did Ishtar introduce, promulgate, and champion sexual immorality, she sanctified it and called it holy. All right, so these immoral acts were a part of her cult and her worship. They were performed as rites in her temples and in her shrines. So in the grip of her spirit, the same thing begins to manifest in our culture. This immorality that we're looking at, it's not just talked about as being, okay, some people do this. It's not just accepted, it's treated as if it is sacred. And it's put on the same level as the sacredness of the relationships that God outlines and defines in his scriptures. Now, it was the former standards and restraints. Former standards and restraints were seen now as sinful, puritanical, repressive, and evil, and the one who opposes these newly sanctified sins or fails to adequately revere them is now treated as something of a heretic. And the opposition to this new morality is something akin to blasphemy. Why? Because they have literally made a religion out of it. If you do not align yourself with this new religion, then you are intolerant. Sounds familiar? So what the spirit of Baal has begun, the spirit of Asherah, or Ishtar, takes to another level. And the work of each god was to bring about the inversion of civilization. So Ishtar had inverted the realm of sexuality. She had taken what was forbidden, unspoken, and taboo, and step by step introduces it into mainstream culture. And it only happens a little bit at a time. But before you know it, now we're looking back like 20 years and we're going, oh my goodness, so much has changed. How did we get to where we are now, where people are literally teaching pedophilia and saying that this is okay? And yet years ago, somebody would be on the phone with the cops if someone even mentioned something like that in a school. Yet now they're talking and openly discussing it. What do they call it? MAPS, minor assisted persons or whatever, right? So, so the shock of each step gets followed by familiarity of that step, and then the numbness, and then the tolerance, and then acceptance, and then celebration, and it just kind of keeps progressing. So it's psychological warfare, but it's being conducted at such a high spiritual level, and most people don't even understand it because they're spiritually blind, because they haven't had their eyes opened, right? So anyhow, the third false god that comes in with this group of, again, ancient Near East pagan gods is Molech. All right? This is the god to whom the people in the ancient Near East sacrificed children. They sacrificed these children for the sake of achieving blessing, including prosperity from the god. So obviously we know that this is linked to abortion and to Ishtar's rites. That is, unwanted children that were conceived by Ishtar worshippers as a part of her religious rituals, which was all, sexual perversion, essentially. All of those children that were conceived through that were encouraged by the priests and by the temple workers to be offered up to Molech. Okay? It's no accident that Planned Parenthood is not only the go-to place for abortion, but also the go-to place to get cross-sex hormones, to change your sex, so on and so forth. That it renders you infertile. It's ultimately, when you look at it at the core, it's ultimately a death cult, right? So back to Ishtar. You can quote a Hittite hymn that was written to the goddess. And again, it ties in with Molech and all of this. But this hymn, the Hittite hymn, and again, this is pulled up from archaeological records, quotes her as being someone who grinds away from men manliness. That is the quote from this ancient hymn. So there was a prayer to her praising her power in her ability to emasculate and feminize men. There is an archaeologist, Zainab Brani's work. He did a book on women called Women of Babylon, and he says that Ishtar's nature was to destroy masculinity and to work, in effect, at the destruction of the cultural order. Another writer says this. Another writer says, additionally, Inanna, which is another name for Ishtar, Inanna is depicted as embodying both male and female qualities. She says, quote, "Though I am a woman, I am a noble young man." Her androgyny is attested to in her cultic personnel, which included eunuchs, transvestites. During her festival, young men carried hoops, a feminine symbol, while young women carried swords. We're told that she, Ishtar, changes the right side, the male side, to the left side, the female side. And she changes the left side into the right side. She turns a man into a woman and a woman into a man. I'm quoting, this is like a direct quote, okay? She adorns a man as a woman, and she adorns a woman as a man. For Soberg, this merely refers to the changing of roles of men and women in cult ceremonies, but given the world-turned upside-down nature of her festivals, an element of gender role reversal does not seem infeasible. As Harris says, Inanna, Ishtar, was a deity who incorporated fundamental and irreducible paradoxes. She argues that through her embodiment of these opposing qualities, she succeeded in transcending them. So, anyhow, so Jonathan Cahn says, sensibly, that if Ishtar worship were to come to America, we would expect to see the feminization of males and the masculinization of females and overall just kind of gender confusion, right? What's more, her priests, her ritual followers, the priests and the others, engaged in public acts of androgyny to show devotion. So what do we have as a cultural parallel today? We've got drag culture, pride parades, so forth, right? So again, Ishtar is this goddess of inversion. If she's to be worshipped in our culture, the Judeo-Christian sexual order has to be overturned, and its opposite has to be enshrined as being what is normative, and that is exactly what happened. According to an ancient Sumerian document, the demons that accompany Inanna, or Ishtar, when she arises out of the underworld, it says this, that they, quote, tear away the wife from a man's embrace, they snatch the son from a man's knee, they make the bride leave the house of her father-in-law, they take the wife away from a man's embrace. And then we also have a quote here from Ehudana, who is the high priestess of the moon in the Sumerian city of Ur. She wrote a hymn about Ishtar that said this, quote, to destroy, to create, to tear out, to establish are yours, Inanna. To turn a man into a woman and a woman into a man are yours, Inanna. Again, it's being spoken of. And these are ancient documents, okay? So I'm talking history here. I'm not just pulling this out from the back seat. I am talking, these are historical documents, so this is something from ancient cultures past, and we're watching the same thing happen today. There is a contemporary trans commentator who wrote the following. They said, one well-known text of similar antiquity to Ehudana's work describes a religious festival held in honor of Inanna. It describes the celebrants as follows, and the quote here says, the people of Sumer parade before you. The male prostitutes comb their hair before you. They decorate the napes of their necks with colored scarves. The women adorn their right sides with men's clothing. The men adorn their left side with women's clothing. The ascending Kugara priests raise their swords before you. And then this commentator goes on and says, the description of the festival appears to show the people of the city cross-dressing specifically for the purpose of the celebration. Indeed, the whole thing sounds very like a gay pride parade, with lots of people just dressing up for the party. Okay, end quote from that particular commentator. So here's the crazy thing, all right? So I think we've laid the ground now to show that all of these ancient customs, so what's happening right now is nothing new. What we're seeing in our culture right now is nothing new. It's been paralleled in ancient cultures as well, and we have the historical documents to show that they had similar festivals, they had similar events, they had similar ways of thinking. But here's the craziest thing. In ancient Near Eastern mythology, we know that there was a lover of Ishtar, okay? And his name was Tammuz. Some of you might have heard this going around, especially if you followed Bailey from End Times News. Or she does the End Times News and stuff. She was talking about Tammuz, goodness, I think like 2 years ago she was on a whole thing about Tammuz, her and Jenny. Anyhow, so Tammuz is the lover of Ishtar. And the month, there was a whole month dedicated to Tammuz, which still exists in the Hebrew calendar. And that marks the month of the separation of Tammuz and Ishtar, which we can interpret as the symbolism of tearing away of the men and women from one another, which is just like that Sumerian hymn that I quoted to you guys just previously. So here's the interesting thing. Now, Jonathan Cahn, he gets the credit for making these connections. He points out the Stonewall riots, okay, those marked the advent of the gay rights movement. They occurred, if you look at the exact day on the Hebrew calendar, guess what day they occurred on? The 10th of Tammuz. Guess what day was ritually significant in the Babylonian culture for the casting of a spell to make men love men? In ancient Babylon, the date on which it was considered ritually correct to perform a spell to make men love men was the 10th of Tammuz. So, the Stonewall riots that sparked the advent of the gay rights movement happened on the exact same day that historically we're told there were cultic rituals performed on the 10th of Tammuz so that the spell might go forward over the civilization, so that the men may love the men. Very interesting. Yeah. I didn't even know this either until I watched this interview with him last night with Jonathan Cahn, and I can't remember the other guy's name. And he was talking about this book of his, and I started doing some research into it, and I'm finding the archaeological documents on this, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, this is wild. It's crazy. So, yeah, so the gay rights movement began on this anniversary. Here's the other crazy thing. The month of Tammuz, all right? 3 Supreme Court decisions, most important to this movement, also happened in that month. Lawrence in 2003, which decriminalized homosexuality. Windsor in 2013, which struck down the Defense of Marriage Act. Obergefell in 2015 legalized same-sex marriage. All of those came about on June 26th. Now, Tammuz doesn't always coincide with our calendar because it's a lunar calendar, right? But all of these instances fell within the month of Tammuz. And guess what? Tammuz has now coincided with the month of June, right? June 26th is when most of these events happen. And what is the month of June? It has become the high holy month of the Pride parades, the Pride festivals of the observation of Pride, which is all about the worship of Ishtar in ancient culture. And if there's a document that literally talked about how Ishtar was given over to her Junia, the celebrations of Junia, which is all over the month of June. So the same ancient principality that dictated these things in the Roman times has come back and is doing the exact same thing in our culture today. So here's an excerpt from Jonathan. He says, the gods brought judgment and destruction to Israel. Could America likewise be in danger of judgment and destruction? Both nations had been dedicated to God at their inception. Israel was dedicated to the Lord. The United States was dedicated to the Lord. Both turned away from God. Both followed the gods of Baal, Molech, and Ishtar. right? Or Asherah. But America has gone farther. It's become the world's primary vessel for the return of the gods. It's become the world's chief proponent of materialism, the worship of prosperity and money, sexual immorality, massive distributor of pornography, abortion, homosexuality, the alteration of gender, you name it, right? So America has single-handedly resurrected the goddesses' midsummer festivals and processions and exposed the whole world to that and encouraged the rest of the world to take place. So yeah, it's very interesting to see. Furthermore, this movement has championed the sign of the rainbow, not just within its borders, but across the world globally. So to take the sign of God's mercy in the wake of judgment and turn it against the ways of God is to call upon yourself a judgment with no mercy. The prophets warned Israel. They said to turn away from God to follow after the gods is going to lead to your destruction. And it did. It led to the incredible destruction of of Israel and incredible suffering of the people. In a similar way, America has turned away from God and now follows after the gods. What is it going to lead to? It must also, in the end, lead to destruction. So, the LGBT movement got set into motion June 26. We're going back to this topic of the 10th of Tammuz, right? So we had this warrant that was given to go ahead and raid a pub that was the Stonewall pub, right? It triggered everything else. So this happened on the 10th of Tammuz, this ancient day ordained for this spell to be cast for man to love man. And then we have the overturning of marriage. The Obergefell versus Hodges also fell 10th of Tammuz, June 26th. And then, of course, the White House highlights this fall of this particular, the overturn of the Marriage Act thing. It highlighted that on the 10th of Tammuz by putting the lights on the White House, the rainbow-colored lights, right? So, let's see here. Yeah, so this hedge of protection got removed when all of these things happened. Now, all of these gods go after children, right? And they all kind of shuffle those kids over towards Molech, right? Because if you have children, as I mentioned, you have the future generation. And so what happened in ancient times is happening now. And you might think to yourself, what possesses an adult to do this to children? And I know that there's people who are, proclaimed liberals who look at the stuff that's going on with the drag queens being, kids being exposed to men dressed like women, doing strip teases. And it's not just conservatives. There are liberal people who are out there going, like, what the heck are you guys doing? Like, this is inappropriate. What is going on? What possesses an adult to allow a child to go and be a part of this inappropriate production? What would possess it? Well, the spirit of this goddess. And that is the goddess that is in charge, right? Ishtar. The goddess of parades. She has parades now happening all over. You go ask these people, oh, do you worship Ishtar? No, they're gonna be like, I don't worship a god, I'm an atheist or whatever, right? I'm agnostic. They're not gonna confess to that, but they're still worshiping. Why are they having these parades for? They're not just celebrating themselves. There's somebody behind the mask, right? And if you look up the ancient inscriptions of the parades, like I said, it describes them. It says in these parades, the men dress up as the women dress as the men. It's a parade of gender bending. And that's exactly what we're seeing now, right? St. Jerome talked about how this happened in the month, in his time. This is first century Christians. St. Jerome said it happened in the month of June, the month of June. The same month that we're having it happen now. She claimed that month. This god, this principality, has a claim on the month of June. And that's why we're seeing this repeat over and over and over again. She is possessing a culture, and this is a sign that she has come back. right? All of these signs also have appeared at in New York City. Here's another one that he brought up, which I thought was interesting. When Ishtar goes to battle, the symbol that she brought with her was the sign of a lion's head. And there was a lion's head there that night in New York City when Stonewall was raided and the gay pride parade broke out for the first time. And there was a woman who triggered the entire event, and that woman, so in the ancient tablets, there is a goddess that is called Storm. They call her the Storm, and she is associated with Ishtar, or Asherah, right? And with all of this whole sexual freedom movement and stuff, right? And so they reference her in these ancient tablets as Storm. Guess what the name of the woman was the night that Stonewall raid happened, and the night that that parade broke out? Her name was Storm. That triggered the whole event. It's crazy. So she called herself Storm Ace. And what else broke out? Dancing, festivities, in the midst of a raid, which was violent, in the midst of this quote-unquote war. All of a sudden people started chanting and dancing. And that's literally what ancient culture and documentation shows was Ishtar's modus operandi, right? Is in the middle of the battle, the people would start a festival. They would start dancing. It was very, very interesting. So, anyhow, so a lot of believers don't understand the extent of what we're dealing with here, right? And that's why they need to know. We also have this instance of the destroyer, and we talked about Molech already, but the god who comes in at the end of this trio is the destroyer, and that is Molech, right? He caused Israel to lift up their children onto his altars and kill their children. And a lot of people think that's a pagan thing. Nobody's doing child sacrifice right now, okay? Never in America. But the warning here is if America turns away from God, and again, remember, Baal causes you to turn away. Ishtar brings in the sexual change, perversion, you know, going after, it's a whole society of hedonism, hedonistic thinking, right? So Baal turns, Ishtar degrades the identity of the culture, and then Molech comes in and says, give me your kids. And a lot of people think, okay, that's not going to happen, but it's true. If you turn away from God, Molech is going to come in and people are going to start offering up their children. And that's exactly what started happening in the late 60s, just when this one God leads to the next, right? So you start sacrificing your children, and that's when the abortion movement came in, right? And here's the thing. What was the ancient culture pushing for with the child sacrifices, right? What was the promise? If you sacrifice your child, you will do what? You'll have better crops, you'll get more money, you'll get better finances, you'll have more freedom, you won't be as poor, right? And so it was really, Molech was targeting the lower income class, right? The poor people that suffered, that had so many children, so many mouths to feed, and they couldn't afford it. What is the target of the abortion industry today? It's the harder classes, the lower income classes. There are more abortions that occur in predominantly black society, black culture, than it is for white culture. Okay, we've talked about that. It is low income families that are getting more abortions than higher income families. Why? It's because the promise is, well, you won't be weighed down, you'll be able to get your career, you'll be able to be financially stable, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's the exact same thing that was promised, just a different twist, so that it fits our culture for today, right? So, as the historians have said, it's the poor children that get sold to be sacrificed. It's the same thing today, right? So, anyhow, so this is what's going on. I saw this discussion, and I was like, I have to share this with you guys because this is crazy. It's something that I was aware of, but mind you, the whole stuff around Stonewall and the things that happened there and the connection with the 10th of Tammuz, I didn't know that before. And so I looked into it, and indeed it is exactly as he said it was. So you can read about this in The Return of the Gods by Jonathan Cahn, C-A-H-N, and he published it last year. The government are still sacrificing people to Molech. Yeah, so it's undercover, and this is the thing, is it's supposed to feel natural. It's supposed to be acceptable by society, right? A lot of people think, oh, I would never sacrifice my kid, and yet very often there are instances when people actually would. Yeah, so I haven't read the book, but like I said, I heard his interview yesterday and was very intrigued by it. So if you guys have any comments, questions, that's my spiel. I'm done spieling. And now I will chat if you guys are interested in discussing, want me to clarify anything. Yeah, you know, and here's the thing, like there's a whole other aspect of things that's going on that with regards to sacrifice and stuff like that we don't talk about, and that never makes the news. India will do abortions due to incorrect star sign these days. Haven't heard about that, but I wouldn't be surprised, honestly. And this is the reason why, did you see the Jonathan Cahn video I sent you? No, I don't think I did. I'm behind on my DMs, so I will check. Which account did you send it to? Because I know you follow me on a couple. Yeah, so this is the thing, because you have a lot of times when you talk to people about this whole thing, especially with regards to like kids, anything to do with kids and this new cultural shift that's happening, transgenderism in children, or their identity, or whatever, or the drag queen stuff, right? People just don't understand. You talk to them and it's like talking to a brick wall, like they don't get it. And they get mad at you for it. It's like you cannot even reason with them. You can't speak sense to them. And they're just continually talking and spewing this rhetoric that's like rehashed from whatever they've heard. And you're sitting there and you're looking at it and you're like, why do you not understand? What is not connecting in your brain? Are there some plugs that are unconnected? Like, is there a screw loose? Like, what's going on? And it's because it's the possession of a society. It's the demonic spirits behind it, right? So we have to be super patient and understanding and recognize, like we've been told, we aren't fighting against flesh and blood. We're fighting against principalities and powers, spirits that are behind all of this stuff. And I do believe that it's witchcraft, right? Like, remember, for those of you who've seen, I'm a huge Lord of the Rings, Tolkien fan, The Hobbit, all of that. I love the books, okay? I will critique the movies. There's a whole other thing there. But in the movies, there was this added scene that isn't even in the books. And they added this scene of Radagast, and he's dealing with Sebastian the hedgehog. And Sebastian's dying. And Radagast is looking at this poor hedgehog, and he's just like, what's wrong? What's wrong? It's almost as if it's witchcraft. And then he just stops and he goes, oh, but it is witchcraft. And that's when he realizes how to combat it, right? That's what we're dealing with our society. It's this spell that's been put over these people, this demonic influence that is blinding them and preventing them from actually hearing and seeing the truth, right? So we have to be understanding of that. You cannot reason with demons. No, you can't. The truth behind the Memphis shooting. Yeah. Okay. I'll have to take a look at that. My mom did tell me earlier, though, just a word of caution, that Jonathan Cahn, he loves the Lord. That's very clear. But he does sensationalize things. and he is into kind of the understanding of the dates and the times, so it borders sometimes on numerology, which is a bit of a Kabbalistic thing, and it can be dangerous. So you need to be discerning with him, as with everything, and just recognize that this is something that could be potentially a weak point, right, with his content. Yeah. They have demon-possessed water. Yeah, so I saw that, Breach. There was... I can't remember the name of it, but there's a specific brand of water, and the company, part of their marketing is that this is water that has been prayed over by a witch. Liquid death or something. Yeah, liquid death. That's what it is. And they said that they had a whole shipment that they had specifically a witch come in and cast a spell over the water so that it would go out, and when people drank it, they would become possessed by spirits. That's on their website, is that if you drink this water, you are accepting the risk of bringing a spirit into your life. Like, I was just like reading through this information and going, okay, that's next level messed up. But I mean, I don't put it past this culture that we're dealing with. It's crazy, right? And I'm sure that there's other groups out there that are doing similar things. This is why you pray over your food, okay? When you buy something, you pray over it, and you ask the Lord to bless it, and cancel any curses that might be over it. Because you don't know who's been touching your food. You don't know who's touching your groceries or handling your fruits and veggies, right? So that's why we pray over our food. It's nothing to be afraid of. If you have the blood of Christ, you're a child of God, nothing's going to harm you, right? But these things we pray over. And we make a stand, so I would never go out of my way to drink this water. Like, no, I'm not doing that. It is very wild. And of course, now we also have the AI stuff that's coming out, which I did a whole spiel on Instagram on my story about the AI stuff. So if you haven't seen that, I'd encourage you to go over there and take a look at it. And if you don't have my Instagram, send me a DM. I'll give you my username. But that's a whole other thing. The whole Snapchat AI. I truly do believe, okay, so I'll give you guys the brevity of it here. Snapchat AI is giving me very much, and I don't know if you've seen any videos of this on TikTok, but it's reminding me a lot of the new age games of where you would like talk to your imagination and listen to whatever it spoke back. This is a way that people are trained to contact spirit guides and talk to spirits. And so there was a lot of games going around when I was a kid where people would do things like this, and you'd record your answers and you'd kind of giggle over it and stuff. And then that's where, you know, the whole Dungeons and Dragons thing came from, because it's, you know, just listening to what your imagination is talking to you about. And in cases it can be harmless, but for the most part, you're dabbling with dangerous things, right? And but this Snapchat AI is there's a few things that have been going around that's very concerning to me, and I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, look, so many young kids have Snapchat. Got nothing against it, all right? You could use it for good purposes, you could use it for bad purposes, just like any kind of social media out there. But now what they've done is, if you just have the regular Snapchat, they're rolling this out for all users globally over this next little bit, where they've uploaded a personal AI for you. And that personal AI is going to look like a user and is going to be pinned to the very top of your profile. And you can tap on it and chat back and forth with the AI. It's your friend, right? And I've seen a number of back and forths with this thing that I'm just like, okay, there is so much potential for a demonic spirit to possess that thing and just have conversations back and forth. Like, it's like a Ouija board. It's very dangerous. And I don't think people realize the possibilities that this AI has to becoming spiritually just a mess. None of it is harmless these days. Yeah. My son's been warned about all of those AI things. Good. Yeah. Deactivated and deleted Snapchat when that AI popped up. So that's something that I'm looking into. I'm just seeing if I put in a request to have my data sent to me by email so that I can download my photos and stuff. Because I have a whole bunch saved on there. And then, like, going back till 2017, 2018, I think. So I'm wanting to just download my photos, but then I'm very strongly considering just deleting my account on there and getting rid of it. Because that's just very concerning. Did you see the chat between a child and ChatGPT about a fallen angel? Yes, I did. I don't know if it was ChatGPT. They didn't identify which AI it was. Yeah. Definitely need to pray for the kids. Can't buy or sell without the mark. Saw a video clip, ChatGPT would joke with Jesus but refused to joke with Muhammad. Yeah, it was Muhammad. There's a few of those that are going around. Yeah. And again, it's just like there's no respect for Christianity, even though it is considered to be the most followed religion of the world, right? Watched a video about someone converting their AI to Christianity. You can't do that because it's not human, right? Reasonable opinion that AI thinks it's a fallen angel because God didn't create it. Interesting. One chat, AI, yikes. Yeah, so the AI stuff is, in my opinion, I've never touched it. And I don't ever plan to. I'm not even going to, for the sake of research, plug chats in and play around with it. I'm not interested. And that's a lot coming from somebody who's a research scientist. Like, I love to think that I am willing to try out all the new tech, all of the new stuff within reason. But this is one thing that I'm looking at, and I'm just like, yeah, there's so many ways this can go wrong. There's a lot of ways this can go wrong. So... Dean, we just finished our discussion. I'm considering uploading this chat to YouTube, and then folks can go and listen to it there. So if you want that done, just send me a message, and I will share it with you when I get it up and going. I mean, I have a YouTube channel, but I just need to download this and upload it. It probably takes about a day. So... it's linked in my bio, so you can find it if you click on the link. Yeah. Yeah, so we were talking about the Near East ancient gods. Baal, Asherah, and Molech. But we've concluded, so it's just discussion time and questions right now. Upload to YouTube, want to listen again. For sure. And if you guys want to listen to the actual fellow who all of my discussion was based off of his work, he has done numerous interviews. I can send you a link, or I'll just upload it on my Instagram story maybe. Well, here's the thing. I don't know if I want to upload it on my Instagram story. I don't know. Send me a DM and I'll send you a link. There you go. You're reading the book right now. Interesting, Shane. Yeah. I've heard it's good, but I haven't read it, so. Okay, I think that is pretty much it. How do I DM here? So if you go onto my profile, there will be a button to just message. There should just be a button for you to message. that would say message, and you can just click that and send me a message. It'll say something like you only have 3 opportunities to message this user. Just ignore it. It'll go through. I believe that the gods are demonic spirits and principalities that are under the authority of Satan. So this is, for those of you, if you're new here, this is a Christian channel. I am a Christian. I believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so I'm not talking necessarily about the return of gods as in I believe that there are other gods outside of Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but just using the terminology that the ancient cultures have used to describe these deities that they have worshipped, which are, as I mentioned, spiritual principalities. So they're not extraterrestrial, they're supernatural. And they will eventually be completely destroyed, right, in the lake of fire, as foretold in Scripture. What makes you believe in God? This is a great question. So okay, here's the thing. And maybe this sounds like silly, but I'm just going to tell you briefly my testimony. I was 7, all right? And I'm an intuitive little kid, okay? I like having my answers for different things, and my family and I had recently started going to a church. My mom had talked to us about God, and she had already believed in Jesus at that point, and she was teaching my brother and I. And I remember driving home from a sports class one day. It's dark out. It's kind of like the autumn. I think it was around the autumn, so you could see the stars really well at night. You're looking out the window. And I remember just looking up at those stars, and I loved stars. I used to stargaze with my dad all the time, and I remember looking up at those stars and being like, God, you created the stars? Because that's what I was being told. It was like, you created the stars, you created the heavens? I want to be friends with you. If you created this, I want to be friends with the one who created all of this stuff. So I'll follow you if you'll be my friend. That was pretty much me giving my life to Jesus when I was like 7 or 8 years old. And at that point, I ended up getting baptized when I was 12, and I was a pretty radical believer compared to my friends. Like, my friends were always, they were kind of, you know, just lukewarm. They were doing whatever was in Sunday school, but I was actually researching. Like, I don't think at any point my faith was ever hanging off of the coattails of my family. It was always very much my own. Like, I came up with ideas to evangelize to people, to share Christian content with people. There was a whole couple seasons where I used to get sticky notes, and I used to like put Jesus loves you on my sticky notes and like tape them into like the malls, public places, on coat racks, on people's cars, you know, just being a kid. And I fell away from my faith. Like, I stopped being passionate about it for a while, and I dabbled with other things. I was very interested in Norse paganism and the occult. But I always knew that God was real, and I had had some very incredible experiences, supernatural experiences that just were not explainable. Went on to go through through academia, sciences, biology, went through grad school, got my PhD, and the whole time I just kept proving more and more that God exists, God is real, and Jesus is the only answer. And in 2019, I had a radical encounter with Jesus where he came to me in a vision, and he pretty much told me, you're either in or you're out. You're either hot or cold. You can't be one or the other. And that was the day that I decided I'm all in. Like, whatever you want, Lord, I don't care if it means my reputation's ruined, which my reputation took a hard hit when I decided to 100% just go all in for Jesus. I lost all of my Christian friends, which was shocking to me because you'd think that your Christian friends would be the ones to stick with you, right? Anyways, I lost almost all of them except for 1 or 2. And yeah, and I have just stuck it out since. What was the vision? So I was in bed, I was getting ready to go to sleep, my lights were out, and I'm just lying there, and all of a sudden, it was just like this bright light appeared, and Jesus was there. He was dressed in white, his face was shining so much that I couldn't see it, and he just spoke to me. And what he told me was this decision that I had to make. And as soon as I told him that I was going to make that decision, he immediately gave me instructions on some things that he wanted me to do. He says, all right, if you're serious, I want you to go through your room and take out all the books that don't honor me, and I'll show you which ones. And he wanted me to burn a journal that I had that covered probably a year worth of memories, but it was also a journal that I had very detailed notes on trauma that I had gone through, just because my memory was really struggling because of the stuff that I had gone through. So I wanted to make sure I wrote it down so I didn't forget it in case I had to file a police report or whatever. And the Lord told me he wanted me to get rid of it and burn it. And I was just like, oh, wait, what? Are you sure? Because I think I might need these. And he said, no, you're going to completely let go of everything that has ever happened to you in the past. And from this day, you're moving forward as a new person. I was just like, okay. I listened and I went through, and you guys didn't, you've never seen my bookshelf. I had a lot of books. I used to collect them. I was a huge into fantasy and sci-fi. I used to do book reviews and stuff online. People would send me books to review and all of that. So I had a pretty decent sized little library going on, and I threw out a huge garbage bag full of books, like big black industrial garbage bag full of books, and those got burned. And then the Lord had me go through again a year later. And for me, it was because those books dishonored God. There was content in them that I had no business, It was, either there was swearing and language that was foul, or it was dealing with witchcraft and the occult, or it just wasn't. He just told me he didn't like it. And so I was like, all right, Lord. So it wasn't about me. It wasn't about whether it was right or wrong. It was about just being obedient to God. And yeah. Oh yeah, you can still read science fiction and be a Christian. So this isn't about that. This was specifically an instruction God gave me. Yeah. So that is the gist of my testimony. And since then, I have been sharing online. This is now, those of you that know, this is my third TikTok account. I'm no longer doing, face videos and stuff on TikTok for personal reasons, well, for many reasons. But God has blessed me with a little ministry opportunity to share the gospel and to encourage other believers. And he's definitely done something with my life that would never have been possible if I hadn't listened to him. So, yes, Karen, it is about Jonathan Cahn's book, but we have finished our discussion. We're just chatting right now, and this will be uploaded on YouTube later, presuming that it downloads okay. Anyway, I hope that answers your questions. Nope, I haven't read his book. So I can't necessarily recommend it or not, but the interview that I have heard from him regarding it was really, really insightful. So it's linked in my bio. My YouTube channel is linked in my bio, so you can find it there. All right, I think I'm going to pop off for tonight, guys. Some great questions, great discussion. And I will, depending on what happens during this week, I might be on later to talk about current events that are going on. But for now, I think this is it. So keep tuned in. And if you see me live streaming in the future, then pop in, say hi. Love to chat with you guys. Anyway, shalom, folks. Take care.